We're going to start now with our next panel about clouds. I would like again to thank very, very much Hubert, Steffi, Marcel, Johannes, and everybody at DLD. I would also like to especially thank the Institute for the 21st Century, Bettina Korek and Karen Mata, who are here. It's a collaboration, this panel, with the Institute for the 21st Century. We will have a panel with presentations by all the speakers. At the very beginning, I will make an interview with Hans Magnus Enzensberger as an introduction. Maybe a few words about the topic. As said Baudelaire, j'aime les nuages qui passent là-bas, 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 les merveilleux nuages. The idea for the clouds came really out of a book of Hubert Damisch and of a book of Hans Magnus Enzensberger, which we're going to discuss. In the history of painting, the cloud is a recurrent element that actually Hubert Damisch contends is the most fleeting of all masterpieces. They can be found everywhere, from Giotto to Constable and onwards to modernism. Damisch wrote in his legendary 1972 book, A Theory of Cloud, that the cloud is found exactly at the point in the system where it escapes. It vanishes within the graphic system only to discover itself again. Cloud archaeology is a science for angel. If the cloud is the 0 degree of painting, geometry defaults where it meets the sky. The system of linear perspective cannot take into account the full complexity of visual experience and hence generates the cloud as a sign, as an agent, as a counterforce with which it is in dialectical interaction. The cloud introduces something that has no place in painting, but at the same time is painting. Damisch concludes the painting is itself defined within this paradox. We all have also experienced the ash cloud. That is another notion of the cloud. And perhaps we have learned that air travel is actually defined within another paradox, and that's where is the link to the previous panel, the control of the uncontrollable. The cloud introduced something that has no place in air travel, but at the same time is air travel. I'd like to very warmly welcome our speakers, Hans Magnus Enzensberger, Thomas Saraceno, Tetsuo Kundo, Matthias Schuler, Elisabeth Diller, Hubert Damisch, Andreas Angelidakis, and Werner Vogels. A very warm welcome to all of you. Yeah, and we will now start, as soon as we have the microphone, with the interview with Mr. Enzensberger. We cannot talk about science and technology unless we talk about poetry. We have invited legendary poet and writer Hans Magnus Enzensberger, who actually, in one of his poems in a collection aptly titled A History of Clouds, said, "Archaeology of clouds, a science for the angel. Yes, without clouds, everything living would die. They are inventors." Mr. Enzensberger, could you tell us about this book? And
well, first of all, I must tell you that I do not have the faintest notion, the faintest idea what I'm doing here, because I'm not involved with big business, I'm not involved in technology, and even what is even worse, I am and remain a sort of analog person. I'm not very digitalized because many of my functions of my life, for example, like eating or like sleeping, hearing, speaking, and so on, still proceed by and large more by an analog code than a digital code. Still, and I think the remarkable question is, how do these two very different codes, how do we manage to combine them in every second of our lives? Because there is no such a thing as a purely digital person. This is a propagandistic device to maintain this. Okay, but then since Mr. Obrist mentioned this book of mine, you do not fear that I'm going to burden you with my poems. But perhaps a few notions about this, about the notion of the cloud. I must congratulate the engineers and the IT people who came up with this concept. It's a very rich concept, many different meanings. And this is rare because usually IT speak is forbidding, incomprehensible, full of acronyms which nobody can decipher, and shows very little respect for common people, for the customer. They couldn't care less about the customer. The self-importance of their mumbo-jumbo is, I think, also not conducive to good business, by the way. Well, but in this case, they have hit upon something very interesting. To call a phenomenon they came up with in the cyberspace, to call it cloud, is ingenious and deserves praise. But still, I do have a few reservations about it, because it is very strange for technologically minded people to come up with such a concept, because, as we all know, clouds are fickle. You can't depend on clouds. They shift shape. They never stand still. They do a lot of things which are not calculable. So it takes some courage on the part of technological-minded people to come up with this, because you might. I think many people are a bit uneasy about the concept of the cloud, of cloud computing, because like clouds, there may be leaks. You see, they may leak. They may rain down data. And so I think you have to build up a certain amount of trust in this concept if you want to succeed with it. Well, that's just a
it's a wonderful beginning. You write in your book about the cloud archaeology as a science for angels. And I wanted to ask you if you could tell us about what you meant by that, if clouds are closer to Earth or to heaven.
Well, yes, they are between, of course, they are between Earth and heaven. And since the angels are supposed to be messengers, they actually belong to the celestial IT crowd, because they are like couriers, you know. The Greek word means messenger. Angelo is a messenger. So I think it stands to reason that since most of us are, of course, unbelievers, but still it is a nice idea. For example, there's the Schutzengel. What is that in English? The protective angel, the angel who protects you, who is guardian angel, who specializes in you personally. I think this is a very nice concept. And so there's no wonder that people hang on to it, even if they are agnostics or something worse.
We also thought it's wonderful to hear about your History of Clouds book, because we really think everybody here should read this book. It's a masterpiece. And I was wondering, because I mean, you observed a lot of ideologies and utopias of the 20th century, whilst actually in the book, A History of Clouds, it's 99 meditations about simple things of life. And I was somehow wondering if the reference to clouds is also an invitation to cultivate our garden somehow.
Yes, well, I mean, it is, as every every child knows, that clouds, the existence of clouds is good for your imagination. I mean, when you look up, and it's also good against depression. The clouds, I think clouds are very good. If you lay in the grass, you know, and look up, this is better sometimes than a shrink. It may be helpful. Well, and since to decipher the shapes in clouds, as every 5-year-old knows, is good for your. It raises your it raises the level of your fantasies, let's say.
There's actually a passage here which covers this so beautifully in the poem. When you say, in exhaustion, anger, and despair, it is recommended that the eyes be turned to the sky. Now, one thing is that about clouds, actually, you say that progress does not occur in the evolution of clouds, not a trace of the fight for survival. Could you talk about this idea? There is no evolution in clouds?
Well, yes, or there is an ongoing one, but it is a cyclical process more than anything else. So the notion of progress is alien, I think, in this respect. Of course, you might speak in the evolution of the universe. In that case, of course, they also have a back history and perhaps not an eternal future like everything else. That is true, but I mean, our notion of progress is quite different. What we have been hearing here, you see, is in terms of an emphatic concept of progress. Things we must be better, more efficient, and so on and so on. I mean, this is not, I think, what clouds are about. But I think we shouldn't go on. We have.
Thank you very much, Hans Magnus Enzensberger. It's wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you so much. I now have the great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Thomas Saraceno, who was originally trained as an architect at the Universidad Nacional de Buenos Aires, then studied at UAF in Venice, where we met for the first time, and at the Schule, and has then actually developed more and more his ongoing project, which is an airport city, cloud cities. A very warm welcome to Thomas Saraceno.
If I can use this or that one. But like this it works. Also. Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you for the invitation, and it's an honor to be with such a great panel, and Enzensberger, and was really inspiring many works, and I will do really experiment. I have to keep the clock very, very close. It's 7:42 because I have around like 300 slides and or somewhere like this. I mean, we might kind of run, and then I think so. It's like what kind of maybe interesting me more is like maybe it's on the question that later maybe start to come up and on the discussion which we'll have when I it's like Tarkovsky always say, like I will give you 50% of the movie, the other 50% you have to imagine yourself, and I think so maybe it's a little bit this kind of attempt to look somewhere. But anyway, what I was asking is like if we can dim a little bit the light, not have it so strong, because I would like really that we concentrate on the images. And to start is there we are. It might be possible to turn down the light. Thank you. But a little bit also to catch up maybe with the other panel. I thought it's funny. I mean, this is Bolivia, right? I thought, maybe I give you the news also. I thought that, it's the flattest surface on the planet Earth, right? And they use it also to calibrate satellites. And maybe one of the great things, I think so, what was happening there is like, I went there really fascinated about the idea of the clouds and tried to make a movie which was shot for the Barbican with 32 cameras, and we do a panoramic movie, but was during the night. During the night, one day which the moon was not really out, we were sleeping in the tent when you see the first image, and then a friend of mine, hey, come outside. We were dead tired because it's so much the reflection, and then, we came out, I must say, just to pee outside. And then all the stars got reflected also on the... And then, it's like we didn't have really the technology to make this movie, but I thought this maybe might be the next movie that we should run down there. If we can have always the images in the center of the presentation, not myself, that would be great. Here also the horizon got blurred, but during the night it was even kind of worse. The funny thing also, the GPS worked, but the compass doesn't work because, no, it's one of the biggest reserve, is the biggest reserve of lithium. It means also for, we jump again? If we could have in the middle the image, please. Thank you. No, I'm more curious than you to keep watching the images, but I'm trying to watch myself, but nevertheless. We don't have. Where? That doesn't happen. Okay. Maybe I watch them more. There we are. Anyway, when Hans also asked me about a map, I thought that would be a good map for, I think it was the past DLD. And then there's this project about, I was kind of imagining always like a cloud city of how we might be able to come up there. And then I think so one big reference today for me, what was missing is Fuller somehow, Richard Buckminster Fuller. And for me, have been like a kind of great source of inspiration. And there is mostly like a project, this is how I imagine, the future cloud city might be moving as cloud move today, and how they're going to form, 50% of the planet is all the time covered with clouds. Continents have a shift in the continental plates during the past. And, I make a kind of a classification through how you could think the future of architecture could be built, and then I start to imagine and looking again at the typology of clouds, and a little bit then maybe go back maybe to this idea of, some collage of how we might be building some of the things. But going back to the panel which was before, beside the solar plane, I think so one great thing which I could tell you is like, some image. I'm using the Est and Fire technology, geometry, which is the soap bubble, basically. Then you can combine it in this kind of great relationship between the volume and the surface. This is how I'm thinking we could, the pursuit of happiness. This is the geometry that we're having. And basically it's the soap bubble geometry, right? Well, down the road, there have been some mathematical discovery with some students who have been working with us. And here is a little bit how you could start to imagine how we could be able to live up there. Well, some other works. Some mirrors to try to kind of bring down the reflection of the sun down to the lower balloons, because it will not be reflected really on the sun. Some models. The solar cooking is kind of pretty efficient way how you can cook today. This is a little bit how you can have a kitchenette in the lower part, some tests with some mirrors, some reflectors. It's pretty much kind of, maybe on this part is kind of more architectural things. One thing also, what I thought the cloud might be a good job, which I call it the wider World Web. There is this HIP, high altitude platform, which might kind of maybe provide access to two-thirds of the world which does not have access to the internet. And I thought I was missing also kind of this comment today. It's like a little bit maybe wider the discussion really and I'm really thinking like two-thirds of the population, they do not have access to this kind of communication and access to the internet. And this is why I thought just to locate the cloud to a different height, you might be able also to deal with this. And there are many different companies we are working on this. Well, there is also like I might go back one slide. Also an idea of kind of interface, how you might communicate with the cloud, send message, and a little bit more like in the technology. Then, a little bit just I developed some ideas of how you might collect the sun. There are solar panels in the middle, there are mirrors, the sun reflected, and then you have kind of more efficient, like the solar cooking, right? And how you start to connect the things. Here we are cooking a chicken. During the Calder residency, it was half cooked because we start pretty late. These are other exhibitions where people could enter. I'm navigating a little bit maybe inside of one of the spheres. You could have a kind of, I love the ideas of biosphere. No? And Bucky also was saying like, we live in a spaceship Earth which is spinning around the sun at the speed. And I think so, going back a little bit to the reflection. As you experience inside also, what had happened here, the jumping casting, maybe many of you have experienced, but what had happened here, the volume was pretty high. And what it means is it became like a floor which is kind of pretty unstable. It means when you move, for example, if I will do like this now and we are all standing in this situation, all of you will going to change movement. This butterfly effect is something which always has fascinated me, and how, your slight movement and how your body interacts in the space, which somehow all this ecosystem is break, because when people enter in the lower part, also it kind of destroyed and all this predictability. But then, a little bit hands-on, we start to build like a solar balloon. And what I could tell you, the solar plane is great, but I think the solar balloon is much greater, or at least I think so. You can build this up with 300 euro a weekend with few friends, and you can fly only by solar energy. This means there is no solar cell, there is nothing. And I can tell you the other thing is like I think so, if some of you have flying in a balloon or lighter than a vehicle, when you are in the gondola and you put your hand out, you never experience wind because you move with the wind. And I think so that's a pretty big difference of what we have talking before. It's like it's much cheaper. There is no conversion, that you have to go the motor, the solar cell, that. And, the wind speeds, you go at a different height and you might move from one direction. The funny thing is that Picard also, he made like the solo around the world with the balloon, but somehow, it's like a kind of and somehow I love balloons, let's say, more than aeroplane, because it's kind of a little bit more unpredictable. It's more challenge because you have to understand much more how the weather works. And it'll be, to go back, that's a funny slide, it costs more to recycle a plastic bag to and this is more like a common approach. Oh, I'm running out of time. Now we're going to be running faster, but then, we just kind of collect plastic bags. We do like a huge balloon. It flies also with solar energy, and it's kind of, maybe I leave it there because I promised to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. I've got the great pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, Tetsuo Kundo, who actually graduated from Nagoya Institute in 1999 in architecture, worked then, that's how we met for the first time, with Katsuo Sejima and Sana Ryunishizawa from 1999 to 2006, and established his own practice in 2006 called Tetsuo Kundo Architects. His first house is the house with gardens in 2008, and what makes it so relevant for the panel here is that in 2010, last year, for Sejima's extraordinary architecture biennale, Kundo created together with climate engineer Matthias Schuler the Cloudscapes, which was actually a real collaboration between architecture and climate engineering. A very, very warm welcome to Tetsuo Kundo. And maybe you're going to do it together, I wasn't sure. In this case, we introduce also Matthias Schuler immediately because it will be a joint presentation. Matthias Schuler is one of the managing directors of Transsolar Energietechnik in Stuttgart. He is a mechanical engineer by training, founded in 1992 the company Transsolar Climate Engineering, and Transsolar's focus is on new energy saving and also on comfort optimizing strategies by an integral approach in building design. It's amazing because Matthias Schuler today works with most of the great architects from Katsuo Sejima to Frank O'Gary to Stephen Hall to Jean Nouvel to Renzo Piano, and he is also a visiting professor at the Harvard University. A very warm welcome to Tetsuo and to Matthias.
Thanks, Hans-Ulrich. Where's the remote control?
Yeah, we must have a remote control somewhere.
So, in a certain way, we will explain you our common work, which is
remote control.
which was an invitation by Katsuya Sejima for the Architectural Biennale last year. We were invited as an engineering company. We thought what you can do beautiful in an Architectural Biennale, make people aware that climate change is happening, but not do it with a finger up, but do it by, in a certain way, move people by the beauty. And we thought doing a cloud indoor might be a good message for people to understand that this is a planet which is worth to be saved. So, and we just heard that clouds are quite important. They are quite important for our climate. Without clouds, we would burn down. So in a certain way, that was the intention of this art piece. If you come to Venice, it's amazing. Venice has quite strange cloud formations because in a certain way, there is the climate from the Alps and the climate from the Mediterranean Sea, which meet in Venice. So above Venice, you can see kind of enormous, wonderful cloud formations. So as an engineer, we looked up how real clouds are working. So in a certain way, you have to understand first how real cloud is happening, then to be able, in a certain way, to transform it from outside to inside. And it's clear, outside we have like 10 kilometers height, where in a certain way pressure is changing. In a 7-meter height room, you are not able to do it similar. So in a certain way, we had to transform it from the kind of real cloud physics into cloud physics for indoor, and that's the stratification in a certain way. You see in the cloud, we had to do like 25 to 35 degree hot layer with 100% humidity. This is where 100% humidity is. In addition, to make a cloud visual, you have to make condensation. 100% humidity doesn't mean it's already kind of obscure. You need to add like a condensation seeds, which are microelements. To create this condensation in the cloud, you need a top layer which is very hot, because humidity is normally rising to keep the cloud in the middle, and you need a cold layer at the bottom. And the first tests we did in Stuttgart is here. We rented a cabbage storage, Stuttgart known for its cabbage, and we did a cloud in the 6-meter high space. Katsuya Seishima came in, and it was so obvious that out of this test, that experiencing in cloud, you need something to bring you up from below the cloud, through the cloud, above the cloud. That is, in a certain way, the whole story about this kind of imagination. And that was when we started to collaborate with Setsuo Kundo, because it was so obvious we would need an architect to help us to make this way from below the cloud through the cloud. This is a kind of infrared picture, how you see the conditions. So below the cloud, you see around 20 degrees, above the cloud spots, which goes up to 60. It was around 35 in the hot layer above the cloud, and you need big machines. So there was a big chiller, in a certain way, taking the heat from below the cloud and pumping it through a chiller to, in a certain way, heat the layer above the cloud and cooling the layer below the cloud. So a quite strong effort to do such a beautiful work, which at the end, this was the entrance into the cloud space room, where from outside you could already see people standing above the cloud and people moving below the cloud. And I think at this point I hand it over to Setsuo Kundo, who did this beautiful ramp to bring us through the cloud.
First of all, thank you very much for inviting us. And I'm a little bit explain about the architectural things, what we thought about it. This is attempt at making a new kind of new space in Biennale exhibitions. And this exhibition space was quite big. That was like 20 meter wide and 40 meter long. And ceiling height was about 7 meter high. And then I think this is maybe 2 or 3 times bigger than this room. And then we filled this room with cloud he made. And then the slope also. The cloud are set 3.5 meter height, this side, and then it has a 1.5 meter thickness itself. And then and also there is a 2 meter height space above the cloud like this. And then this slope is kind of a path in a new field which made by a cloud. This is another photo. Oh, sorry. Anyway, yeah, this is a different photo from the top of the slope. Oh. It's quite difficult. Oh. And then this is a chair also we made for this exhibition. Maybe you can feel the size of this space with cloud. And then when you walk along with this slope, you can go into the cloud and reach top of the cloud. Then back to cloud again. And sometimes you cannot see anything inside of the cloud. And sometimes the sharp and soft edge of cloud is coming towards to you. Yeah. Oh yeah. This is a really edge of cloud. It's moving also, and then suddenly you can view. You can get a wide view in front of you, and then can see entire room. Next, yeah. Next, please. Yeah. So your environment, your surrounding space is always changing a lot dynamically. And then there are so much information in this room, such as like a temperature. As he explained, top part is very hot and the low part is cold. And the humidity is very much different in each place. Also, brightness and darkness is different because the top of cloud and below the cloud is different. And the color by natural light is very much different. And then, of course, shape of cloud is different. So, can I? Yeah, this is the top part. And then also, this difference is changing time to time, every seconds, and obviously it's a cloud. It becomes sunny and then becomes cloudy. Sometimes a little bit translucent, and then sometimes it becomes a very dense, thick cloud. And I think if the condition has got too much information, it also creates an abstract and then transparent space, I think. So when people feel these conditions, they suddenly start to pay attention and can feel entire space, not only just around you. Just they start to think about very corner of the room, for example. I think then their own area expanded, and I think this is really complex and a simple environment. This kind of things makes new space, we thought. This is about our installation in Venice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
What he missed to say, the ramp was moving like 10 centimeters in height. So walking on the ramp was not walking on solid ground. You really felt like quite unsafe. And I can tell you it's wonderful to walk on a cloud.
Thank you so much, Matthias and Tetsuo. And Mr. Enzensberger just reminded me about the experience in the mountains, no, with clouds, which has a lot to do what we just saw. And the mountains lead us to Switzerland, and that leads us to the Lake of Neuchâtel, and that leads us to Elisabeth Diller, and the extraordinary piece for the Swiss Expo in 2002, the building as a cloud, which Elisabeth Diller with Diller Scofidio Renfro did. Elisabeth Diller is a principal and co-founder of the studio Diller Scofidio and Renfro. Their work encompasses architecture, urban design, temporary and permanent site-specific installations, multimedia theatre, electronic media, and print. Some of the recent projects for the Lincoln Center, such as the Juilliard School, the Alice Tully Hall, and the School of American Ballet. Very importantly, the High Line, a park situated on the obsolete railway running through Chelsea, a project which completely changed New York, and the Mott's same townhouse, as well as the Boston Institute for Contemporary Art, opened in December 2006. A very warm welcome to Elisabeth Diller.
Okay. Thank you, Hans. Just make sure I can communicate here. Does that work? Okay. I have to say, leave it to Hans to assemble a panel of 8 people that are cloud obsessed. That's a cultural impresario. just want to say that the cloud has been forever a rich metaphor used to represent everything from uncertainty to ascension to many things, including a notion of formlessness, as in this distributed computing network. But a cloud is also a mass of condensed water vapor floating in the atmosphere, and it's defined by a lack of definition. It's this lack of definition which is really interesting. It's the lack of delineation, basically a form without contours. And we got really, really involved in wanting to make one, and at all costs. So the opportunity was at the Expo 2002, and we were very interested, it's connected to making a kind of formless architecture, or an architecture of atmosphere. This is very difficult for architecture because it's typically defined by geographical fixity within legal limits of property lines, within a very well-developed envelope, which is a new great territory for architectural research. This I'll just describe very, very quickly. It's about 100 meters wide, and water is pumped from the lake, and it's filtered and shot through 35,000 nozzles at very high pressure. But there's another kick here because there was a smart system. There was a weather station that was picking up the wind speed, the wind direction, the temperature, the dew point, and so forth, and in real time adjusting and creating this cloud from the water. So basically the project is nothing but structure and plumbing, but it also has a kind of smart intelligence that was learning. And that was really very important because it was developing its intelligence. So this is essentially the diagram, the mechanical diagram of how it worked. And there was a computer interface. So this is the structure. These are the nozzles, very, very kind of old-fashioned. And this was the interface, where someone just watching this would adjust and make it learn, so at a certain point it would not need any kind of human intervention. This is the approach as one got closer. And then here on one side you could see from shore, and from the other side what it really felt like to be in there. For us, it was really a kind of an opportunity to make a piece of architecture that's featureless and depthless and scaleless and massless and surfaceless and dimensionless. It's really a kind of, it's not a negative, but it's an opportunity to really think hard about our dependence on a master sense of vision. At the same time, it was a kind of critique to our consumer culture, which is so insatiable, has such an insatiable appetite for ever greater virtuosity in the digital realm, and everything is measured in pixels per inch. Blur is very low definition. It's an anti-spectacle. There are many issues that we were looking at here, ones of de-emphasis. I have to say that we were very influenced by Hubert Damisch, and he was invited for a tour, and I promptly lost him. That was one of the great thrills of doing this project. He somehow got lost in the mist, and then we recovered him later someplace. So the public would ascend up, pop through the cloud, and at the very top was the angel bar, and that was where the public could actually drink the architecture and drink the cloud. And this is the descent. And this was really unpredictable. We didn't know how it would behave. We did a lot of tests, but it was very interesting that depending on the weather, we had to fight the weather here. It was very different than your project. The wind was constantly in motion. Sometimes our cloud was on the structure, and sometimes it was a quarter mile away, and it was growing, and it started to interfere with the roads and with safety. So it was very interesting, and also with health, because we breathed in this atomized air, which is very dangerous. So it would look different all the time, every moment. We got a lot of our images off the web, by the way. We didn't have the presence of mind to take very many pictures, and sometimes the weather just really came right into it, and you couldn't really discern between artifice and nature. And then one day, it became a black cloud. And then, to preserve it forever, it became a chocolate bar, which is the highest compliment that any architect working in Switzerland could be bestowed with. And I wanted to just segue, I have a little bit of time, into a contemporary project. So that was 10 years ago. We're doing this idea of working with a kind of formless architecture, of overcoming some of the heroism, of the hardness of architecture. We had another opportunity, very different in nature. This is the Hirshhorn Museum. It was built in 1974 by Gordon Bunshaft. And it's this very hard, it's a museum filled with contemporary and modern art. And it's an opaque building that's a donut. This is it from the inside. And it hovers in the air. It's on one of the most important sites in the United States, on the National Mall. And you could see on the right side, there it is toward the bottom of the screen. It sits there with all the monumental buildings that are very relevant to representing the government and its and culture. Yet the mall itself really stands for the one democratic place in the States where protests are really welcomed almost, and rallies. This is the place where Martin Luther King did his very famous I Have a Dream speech. And we felt very strongly that this air, the air of the mall, could be inhaled by our building. And this was an addition, actually, to the Hirshhorn, and then breathed into a different kind of structure that was very supple and would take the shape of this space. So I should add that we were asked to expand by 18,000 square feet for a temporary structure. So this was the way that we chose to expand, and it just used the available space and basically just kind of squeezes out, oozes out. It's a space that is then programmed with cultural activities and also with kind of lounge space and social space. There it is, and this is up 2 months out of the year, and then is folded and then returned back the following year. This is the section. We're working with German engineers, the Form TL, which are helping us engineer this. And this is super important that it's something that really needs to be said, that the two projects that I'm showing are very dumb. They're very, in terms of the architectural stuff, as I said, plumbing and structure, and in this case, a membrane structure. But it's the technologies that are really helping us to develop these, which are really beyond the capacity that architecture had before. So in this case, the technologies that are able to make tensile membrane out of woven silicon glass fiber, and also the software that's able to read and design with internal stresses and deformation and external stresses like the wind. And so this is the structure that's being held there only with water ballast and with a couple of cables just to prevent it from floating away. And this is some of the modeling from our early modeling to our latest modeling to look and read the results. And I just want to say in conclusion, there's something that Victor Hugo initially said and predicted about the death of architecture, that the printing press would kill, and this will kill that. The book will kill architecture as the medium of cultural dissemination and vehicle of communication, and then computing would kill the book, and it's starting to happen, except people still write books. And architecture essentially is doubly killed, but somehow it's still trying to keep it alive, and very much a cycle that with the newest technologies it really helps us to really think about a new course for architecture that isn't heroic, that isn't hard, and that is very supple and interpretive and could be made out of bricks and pixels and droplets and bits. Thank you.
Thank you so very, very much, Liz. I have now the great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Hubert Damisch, who after a first career as a jazz musician studied philosophy at the Sorbonne in the 1950s, where Merleau-Ponty introduced him to a large range of cultural topics and to perspectives through the text of Erwin Panofsky. He was trained as an art historian by Pierre-Franck Castel. His doctoral dissertation, which matters so much for the panel today, La théorie du nuage, was published in 1972 and came out in 2002 in English as A Theory of Cloud. Hubert created the Center for History and Theory of Art. He was also invited by Jacques Derrida to hold seminars at the École Normale for over 10 years. And we met actually with Rem Koolhaas, Hubert Damisch, Rem Koolhaas, Michel Foucault, had legendary meetings in the US. And similarly to Liz, who said how much she was inspired by Hubert Damisch, Rem Koolhaas always told me as well, from the moment onwards he wrote Delirious New York, how much he was inspired by Hubert Damisch. A very, very warm welcome to Hubert Damisch. Do we have the thingy bar for?
Just to present
Where do we have it? Yeah, no, we need the thingy bar to move on the images. Oh, it's here. It was under the papers.
Okay, you can use this microphone. Well, I'm sorry for that. So I just push it. Where do I push? The green button. The green button.
This one?
This one.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry for the... I'm very pleased to talk after my good friend Liz Diller, because what she presented us with their magnificent blurs on the Neuchâtel Lake has been very decisive for the development of my own thinking about clouds. So it was very important for me to speak after her. I will talk about the notion of construction in association with the object cloud. Ludwig Wittgenstein was not only one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, but he was also some kind of an architect. He was part of in the building of the family house, Wittgenstein family house in Vienna. So he knew, what I mean is that he knew something about what construction may mean. And when he says that one cannot construct, one cannot build, he used the word bound, one cannot construct, one cannot build a cloud, we have to take it very seriously, because what did he mean through such an assertion? An assertion which means that if we accept it, Charles Baudelaire's beautiful definition of the clouds as architecture of vapor, construction of the unpalpable, it's in the spleen of Paris, would amount to what is known in rhetoric as an oxymoron, a contradiction in term. There would be a contradiction between construction and cloud, between architecture and clouds. Central to the issue of cloud is thus the idea of construction. One can produce cloud, which we just saw a beautiful example, involving the participation of architecture as such. The structure in Blur, the structure which produced the cloud, was one of the most beautiful pieces I ever saw in architecture, extraordinary structure. One can produce clouds, one one may elaborate, not necessarily construct, but one may elaborate on the concept of the cloud. One may have to face another eruption of a volcanic cloud, the one was referring to a moment ago. But dealing with clouds in terms of representation is quite a different affair.
You want the next slide?
Yeah, the next slide. Okay. Oh, no?
There it is.
Yeah. You all recognize the one of Monet, most beautiful Monet's water lilies, and you have the reflection of clouds, of two clouds on the water. I will go back to it later, but I wanted to start with it because it's a real turning point in the whole story. The whole story started 5 centuries ago with the same Brunelleschi, the architect, the Florentine architect, who was responsible for the first major achievement in Renaissance architecture. I mean the beautiful cupola that you see here, the cupola of the Santa Maria del Fiore in Firenze. The same Brunelleschi was involved in the production of a series of demonstrations regarding perspective, which are of great interest to us. The first experiment involved the view of the Baptistry. The view of the Baptistry, we went too fast, but anyway. The view of the Baptistry as it is seen from inside the door of the main door of the Cathedral, which is behind. You see, so we presented on a small panel a view built in constructed in perspective of the Baptistry as it is seen from the Cathedral. You have the plan here. The next. This is the Baptistry presenting us with the two elements that we need to construct the perspective, the ground plan and the elevation. So here we have the rendering of the experiment. He painted the Baptistry as I just told it, pierced a hole in the panel, had the panel put on his eye, and he would look at it in a mirror. I will ignore the implication of the theoretical implication of such a development, of such an experiment. What I want to underline, to insist on, is the fact that regarding the clouds, regarding the sky with the clouds, he didn't paint it. He put a mirror at the top of the panel, and he used it to have the clouds reflected, the clouds that were passing in the sky reflected in the mirror. I don't know how it worked, but that was the idea. He didn't construct the clouds. He had them stolen from the sky, if I may say, and put into the paintings through the mirror. Clouds. What he wants, what the experiment was. Yes, something. This corresponds approximately to what. To the view of the Baptistry. It's in another painting of the Renaissance, a very well-known one, which means that they were involved in the representation of such a, in the concept, the implication of such a construction. The implications were that clouds cannot be represented through design, a term coined in Italian Renaissance that covers all the graphic means that are part of the process of painting, including perspective. Clouds have no consistency, no permanency, and first of all, clouds have no outlines. This is the main thing. Leonardo da Vinci was going to insist on it also. How can you paint something that has no outline? During the Renaissance, that was some sort of an oxymoron, I repeat. Nothing that can be treated in terms of Euclidean geometry. Now the question is, for us, and I will deal with it as fast as I can do it, does the digital age and the new form of geometry that are associated with it change the issue of the cloud in one way or another? I have no time to deal with the way in which the 19th century was preoccupied with clouds. The real turning point was to come later. In the last volume of Marcel Proust's Search for Lost Time, Marcel, the narrator, remembers that as a young boy, when he walked in the Guermantes way along the Devon River with his grandfather, one day he crossed the bridge over the Devon River and he cried out, "Zut alors," which is a French expression which can be rendered in English as my, or something like that, damn it. Upon seeing the shadow of a cloud reflected in the water among the water lilies. It's interesting because in the first version of the memory in the Proust Search for Lost Time, he doesn't refer to the water lily. He says that he got excited seeing the shadow of a cloud reflected on the water. And in the second time he referred to the experience, he added the water lilies, which means that he had seen the Monet paintings in the meantime. Monet and Nymphaeas, as I presented it when beginning, obviously correspond to a major articulation in the whole story. Painting cannot grasp the cloud as such. Painting can only grasp clouds through their reflection, their shadow. Either the reflection in the mirror, as in Brunelleschi's experiment, or as the shadow in Monet's. So I would have liked to give to this short talk as a title, The Shadow of a Cloud. The shadow of a cloud that he calls Alfred Hitchcock's The Shadow of a Doubt, famous film by Alfred Hitchcock. And it's something in the idea of clouds that we have to, there is a doubt involved in the idea of clouds. We have to doubt about our own relation to representation. The issue is, does the digital age transform the issue by providing us with a means of dealing with unstable or more or less gaseous forms or substances that do not conform to Euclidean standards, from soap bubbles to the volcanic ash cloud? Cloud computing is not heading in this direction. Let us make this point clear. Cloud, as it is used as a metaphor for the Internet, is a deliberately archaic metaphor, based, in fact, on the so-called cloud drawing that was associated with the telephone network in the late 19th century and 20th century. We learn from Roman Jakobson, the great linguist, what about the role of archaism as a rhetoric tool. In fact, the image of the cloud as an architecture of vapor, a construction of the impalpable, is still prevalent in the public mind, as it is in advertising. I show you two. This is one of the most well-known example of cloud computing. I went too fast. Can I go backwards? Can you present? Yeah, okay, good, great. You see how far we are from a cloud. In fact, it has nothing to do with a cloud. You could be referring to an island, for instance. It could be an island, and I'm actually working on the relation between the notion of island and the notion of clouds. This is the telephone network, and this is what the cloud computing is supposed to mean. you see the way they try to persuade us that it has to do with clouds by putting the perspective grid on clouds. And the last one will be what they present in publicity in advertising as the cloud, but it has nothing to do with the scheme I presented before. So now we may have doubts. Is a digital cloud conceivable? A vapor contained within turbulent outlines, which means the outlines that are composed of bits of small points that may move very fast, turbulence. Fractal geometry, as it has been invented by the mathematician Benoit Mandelbrot, paved the way towards a new system of presentation, including turbulent outlines that could change our image of the clouds. But this is a way to raise the main issue. Dealing with clouds. Is our future clouded in this sense of the word? Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so very much to Hubert Damisch. Now a great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Andreas Angelidakis, who is an architect who likes mountains and clouds and websites as much as he likes buildings and trees and people. What is interesting if one looks at his trajectory is that it's always kind of at the intersection of two systems. There's art and architecture, there's virtual and the real, there's building and nature, there's ruin and construction, and there is also Greece and Norway. That's why it sort of made me think of Alighiero e Boetti, the Italian artist who called himself Alighiero and Boetti. So a very warm welcome to Andreas and Angelidakis.
Thank you.
So this is all right. My slides are acting up a bit, and the videos are refusing to play, but we're going to fix that. So I want to. I mean, we heard of all these really interesting talks, and the way that I've kind of proposed cloud computing is really a way of living, a kind of a mode of habitation. What this kind of cloud computing system proposes is a place where we put all our things, we arrange our life, and that's a habitation, and it's really a life that is promised without objects. So we put all our images, all our data on the servers, and we don't need anything. We're in a cloud. When you're an architect and you're designing buildings in the last couple of decades, you usually use a computer. And what has that shifted is that that changed a bit the way we design buildings. We copy-paste a lot of things. We find libraries of objects. When you're designing buildings in the clouds, you tend to find these objects online in, let's say, ready-made libraries, and you copy-paste those. On the slide is me a few years ago in Second Life. I used to go there a lot. And I used to have this white orthogonal box that said, this is my office. And wherever I would go, I would put it down, and that would be my office. And so I'm here in Second Life and kind of collecting objects that I would later on copy-paste into buildings. Oops. Of course, the idea of copy-pasting buildings is not new. Le Corbusier proposed this domino frame, beginning of the 20th century, and this was a kind of domestic, affordable utopia. It was a kind of frame where you could fill up with your life, with your building, and it could be adapted for anywhere in the world, and this would be the ideal kind of template, if you want, for this domestic utopia. Today in cloud computing, we use a lot of templates. Let's say an empty Facebook page is a template, and then you log in and you fill it up with your stuff, with your data, and that kind of becomes your home. So the idea of template is really important to this cloud computing architecture. Now, growing up in the South Mediterranean, I think we can have the video. I saw this template of Corbusier used and really kind of abused in a crazy way into structures which not only were filled up with life, but that was done over time. So people built up these concrete frames, and as they had money, they kind of built one floor, and then they filled it up with a second floor, which is kind of exactly what we do in a Facebook page. We fill it up with life as we go along. And then it really also talks about this kind of cloud computing thing as a drift, as a float, as a fickle building, as mentioned before. So these buildings change over time. They're not just designed and built. They kind of evolve over time. And that's what you end up with, is kind of almost ephemeral, crazy structures where part of the domino frame has become a house, and then part has been left open, outdoors. And people really lived in them, even in summer times. It's really kind of this ephemeral lifestyle that has been proposed or promised by cloud computing. So I really thought of these ideas kind of needed to be worked together, maybe to be... can we have the next video? I wanted to put these ideas together into some sort of memorable object. So I took this domino frame. I guess you could say this is me walking there somewhere in the cloud computing. And I went to look for a cloud, and I went to this website of a friend of mine. The website was called whywashesad.com by artist Raphael Rosenthal. And there you kind of deleted clouds. And I knew he had really designed nice outlines for clouds, of course. So I picked one from this website. And yeah. Of course, I put it on pilotis, which is another Le Corbusier kind of icon, to make up this kind of memorable object for cloud computing. The idea was that this house would not be a proposal for a finished object. It would be a kind of object that contains this architectural thinking about cloud computing. And it would be a house, obviously, that would exist in different moments in time as different stages of completion. So here is just an empty concrete outline with a kind of purple thing inside. It's an outdoor object that you live almost close to nature. Maybe we can have the next slide. So, or it could be like more filled up with more objects. Or it could be like a more complete, a real house. And I really thought of it programmatically as a vacation home, because that's also another part of the idea of cloud computing. It promises a kind of ephemeral place, an affordable domestic utopia to which we could possibly escape to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andreas Angelidakis. I've got the great pleasure now to introduce our last speaker, Werner Vogels. Dr. Vogels is Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Amazon.com, where he's responsible for driving the company's technology vision to enhance innovation on behalf of Amazon's customers at a global scale. Prior to joining Amazon, he worked as a researcher at Cornell University. He holds a PhD from the Vrije University in Amsterdam and was named in 2008 CTO of the Year by Information Week for his contributions to making cloud computing a reality. A very warm welcome to Werner Vogels.
Thank you, Enzensberger, for actually calling me human. Yeah, so I mean, engineers actually have human tendencies now and then, especially when we have to name things. They don't always work out like that. Can I have my slides, please? Oh, wait, I have to... Thank you. I tend to walk around like a caged animal. Don't get distracted from it. You're all really troopers actually staying this late. And I'm also very much aware that I'm the one between you and the wine and the beer. Yeah, so... but I'm also here so I can't see the clock. Yeah, so that's good. So one of the things, when Amazon is one of the pioneers in cloud computing, and actually when we were thinking about building all of this, or actually when we were thinking about this, why cloud, is that we would want everybody to dream that anything would be possible if you weren't constrained by resources. It's about 6-7 years ago when we were actually really thinking about, where's this kid in a dorm room in Dartmouth sitting there with the idea for the next Google or for the next Amazon. And we would know that in that case, if he really would have that idea, he would not be able to make it reality. Because he would have to go out and get money, loan money with all his friends and his parents, and because the biggest stumbling block would be how to get compute capacity. And we wanted to get to a point where anybody could dream, anybody could have an idea and immediately execute on it. And if he would become popular at that moment, that compute power would be infinite. That you would no longer have to think about, where to get all this stuff from. It needed to be just like electricity. And actually, so that there's a strong analogy with things like electricity or other utilities. Yeah, if you look at this picture, this is actually how, about 100 years ago, the beginning of the previous century, most companies actually were responsible for creating their own electricity. This is a brewery in Belgium, and they had about 10-12 people on staff just to generate electricity. And you can imagine, generating electricity has nothing to do with brewing beer. It is just the cost of doing business in those days. And actually, you had to have quite a bit of capacity to start a real business, because one of the first things you had to do was actually buy a generator. And so when public utilities came into play in the beginning of last century, most businesses couldn't quickly enough dump their generator and actually start using the generalized power. And there were quite a few companies out there actually. And this is the Hoover Dam that actually generates so much power that no business in the whole area around it ever needs to have a generator again. And so for us, the idea was that with all the knowledge that Amazon had accumulated over the years about really building highly efficient, highly scalable, highly reliable systems, that we could use that knowledge to actually start building services and put them out for everybody to use, just like electricity. Yeah, and that we would actually distribute this electricity to whoever would want to use it. And so the ideas around this would be that there were a few concepts that we set up front that were really important. One of them, but there had to be a utility model. No longer things like you have to pay for a month rent of a computer, or you really should be paying by the hour, and not only by the hour if you grow, but most importantly that if you were not using it for that hour, you wouldn't have to pay for it. Just like electricity, you actually only pay for what you use. That may seem like not such a revolutionary model, but in the whole compute world, it was. The whole compute world is full of long-term contracts, lock-in, and you have to promise to start using this for a whole year, otherwise you can't get a good deal. All of those kind of things, in our eyes, had to disappear. Because we really wanted to democratize the way that businesses will be created. And so paying by the drink was one important concept. The other thing was that this should be infinite. Or, really infinite doesn't exist, but let's say virtually infinite. That you wouldn't have to worry anymore that once you actually were using it and you had a great idea, or you wanted to take your product in a completely different direction, that you would never be constrained again by resources. And that if you wanted to go to time to market really fast, you should be able to do that. You should not be held back by resources anymore, ever. The third part was that, of course, this stuff, we should take away with this most of the really hard things around running a website or running a business on the internet, which will be reliability, making sure that you can scale up, make sure that you're secure, and all of these other things should be provided by that. You should be able to completely focus on what your business was, what your business differentiates from other businesses, instead of that you have to do the same thing that everybody else had to do. So our idea would really be that we will get this cloud, and cloud is not only something that actually is vapor and rain and particles up in the air, but there's also a notion around cloud is that it actually clouds. We never know what is actually inside the cloud. In general, clouds up there have either rain or particle or ice particles in them at very big distance, but we never think about. Sometimes clouds, something can cloud something, which means that you don't really know what's inside there. And that was the idea, that you wouldn't know what would be inside there, just that you actually don't really know how electricity is being generated. And you don't know how electricity looks like, yet we all use it. And so compute power should become like electricity for all of us to use, if you want to use it at any time. Now, actually, so this is not such a revolutionary new model. If you look back at bigger economic patterns, this is sort of a pattern that is going on for a longer period of time already. We see, increasing competition, a wealth of new products coming into the market, much shorter time frames in which these products are being delivered, and actually a much greater power by consumers in deciding at any time of the phase which product they're going to like. So this results in enormous uncertainty in the market, because you don't know on forehand whether your products are going to be successful or not. Maybe 10 years ago, as a software vendor, for example, you could kind of predict what your customers were going to do. That's all finished. And actually, it goes for many other businesses as well. It goes for manufacturing. There's a whole range where there's a great paper by John Hagel and John C.D. Brown called From Push to Pull that actually explains all of this in a bigger macroeconomic context. But maybe a good example there is looking at universities. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you would go to university, and actually your professor would tell you which 20 courses you had to take to graduate, period. Now you come to the university and you're being offered 400 courses from which you have to pick. That means at day one at the university has no idea where the resources need to be applied to, because it all depends actually on what the students are going to choose. So resource allocation has become a nightmare. And so for most businesses that have to deal with these new models, a new model of resource allocation is necessary. That means that you have to allocate resources on demand whenever you need them. You share them when you no longer need them. You only pay for what you use, and you use others' core competency. And those are actually the core concepts that are the bigger macroeconomic concept, but also come back in cloud computing. Now, come to reality. We've talked a lot actually about, in the past days, about all these games that actually run on Facebook. You have Zynga and Crowdstar and Playfish and Plinga and all the other companies that all provide these games on Facebook. When you play those games, you actually think you're on Facebook. That's not true at all. You're actually on Amazon. All of these companies, and you talk to each of them. When you talk to Zynga, when you talk to Playfish, they will tell you, without the cloud, they could not have built their business. Remember, 2 years ago, these companies didn't exist. In 2 years' time, they've grown to such a big, enormous phenomenon that they could never have come there if they had to do that with a traditional resource model like the old-fashioned hardware model. And it goes all the way from not only these younger startups, it also goes all the way to enterprises. All of them are using these days. And maybe a good example of that is actually the federal government in the US. The federal government has bought into this big time. Why? It's because they want programs that they think about now to be delivered 6 months from now. And in a traditional world with resource allocation, especially in the federal government, it would take them 1.5 years to 2 years to deliver a program. They want to be effective really right now. And actually I've become sort of a collector of the seals of different departments of the US government that is actually using these cloud services. And I'm most proud, of course, by NASA, because that's actually, as an engineer, that's where you want to work for. But also, probably these are your most favorite tools on the internet these days. All these companies couldn't exist, or that's what they say themselves, I'm not claiming that. All of them were built, were enabled by the fact that there was a cloud and that they could get started small and become big easily. And even today's, the big hits from the past few months, Flipboard, Hipmunk, Quora, all of them. There's hardly any company being built anymore that isn't built on top of cloud computing. Yeah? Of the Y Combinator is a very big incubator in the US. They graduated in the fall, 36 companies, 35 of them launched on Amazon Web Services. And the other one's not going to make it anyway. Actually, it's not just that they are making use of these software services, they become part of the ecosystem. And they play an enormous important role in that ecosystem as well. SoundCloud, German company from Berlin, their original goal was actually to be a hub for musicians to share music. They are now becoming a cloud to provide sound for the whole web. They want to become the platform which each website, each internet business can become sound enabled. And it's a great company and a great success, I think, for German startups. Now, there's one form of cloud actually that I want to touch on last. Have you guys ever heard of the story of Mechanical Turk? Yeah, Mechanical Turk from Kemper actually traveled the world with this big box, and where he played against master chess players. This was a robot that played against the kings of the world, and he always won. Yeah? And it was in reality, it wasn't at all a robot. There was a human actually that sat inside that box, a grandmaster chess player that actually was really playing. This is, the original form of cloud. You don't really know what sits in the box, and you don't care as long as it works. We use that metaphor for another service that Amazon delivers. It's called the Mechanical Turk service, which actually encapsulated human labor. So, for example, so you can write a computer program where in the middle, actually humans perform tasks. Because there are some tasks that humans are just way better at than computers will ever be. For example, many corporations on the internet use it to do moderating of user-generated content. Yeah? Users generate a lot of content and not always appropriate content. And humans are actually themselves much better at weeding that out very quickly than writing computer programs for those. But also, quite a few folks have actually used Mechanical Turk for art projects. And given the panel that I was on today, I'll bring up two examples from Eric Koblin, who was actually here last year to demonstrate the the musician project. He was on your panel last year. Aaron Koblin, Johnny Cash project, yeah. But before that, he actually used Mechanical Turk for two other projects. One was he used 10,000 Mechanical Turk workers to collaboratively draw a $100 bill project picture. None of those workers knew of each other that they were actually drawing, being part of this $100 bill. Yeah, and if you go to his website, so each of them managed small pieces. He gave them a dedicated tool. And actually, if you go onto his website, 10,000cents.com, you can see the details of how each of those individuals actually contributed to the overall picture. And I think he paid 1 cent for each of those drawings. Another artwork that he made was something called the sheep market. Yeah, he paid 2 cents to anyone who was willing to draw a sheep left-facing, and he didn't give you an eraser, so you had to draw this as one drawing immediately. And so he has hundreds of thousands of sheep like that. And if you actually go to this, it's a big art installation where in detail you can actually go into find out how everybody draw their sheep. Now, this is just a fun part of actually using these kind of cloud services where in this case the human is encapsulated in the cloud without that you know that. Now with all of this cloud computing, it's most important to realize that it's still day one. the disruption that is caused by cloud computing is actually just starting. And the things that we will see happening in the coming years will be unbelievable. New businesses will be built that are so revolutionary new because the ecosystem is getting richer and richer where others can build upon. And that's the promise of cloud computing, that anybody can dream on their own cloud of what they want to achieve with technology. Thank you.
Vogels. I'd like to thank very deeply our wonderful speakers, all of you. And as would say Douglas Gordon, it has only just begun. Thanks a lot.